This plant is everywhere. Guten gardening, everybody. The plant that's right beside me is known by a wide variety of names: goosefoot, pigweed, wild spinach, just to name a few. But today we're going to be calling it by the name that I think might be the most common name, and that is Lambsquarters. And this is something that we definitely didn't plant, but it is showing up in a ton of places in our garden. And it's not actually a bad problem to have, because even though this is often treated just as a weed, this is actually a really nutritious plant that you can eat. Now, I wouldn't necessarily consider myself to be the most adventuresome forager out there, but when it comes to these edible weeds, as long as there's a good history of how people use these plants and the safety and understanding of the nutritional value, etc., behind them, then I am typically game to give them a try. And this Lambsquarters is absolutely no exception. Now, in today's video, we're going to focus on a couple of different aspects about this plant. I'm going to try to be as thorough as possible while keeping it as engaging as possible. We're going to talk about the appearance, the taste, the preparation of this plant in terms of its uses, etc., and then some of the warnings that go along with eating a plant like this, because I think that's important to note as well. Now, you might be wondering why we have all of these Lambsquarters here in these hanging baskets. Well, I can tell you with absolute certainty we didn't plant them, but once I start to describe how this plant grows, I think you're going to understand why there are so many all around. But let's first talk about the appearance. Now, in terms of seeing these start to become more and more prevalent, you'll notice around late May, early June, that's when they're really going to start popping up here in Zone 5, Wisconsin. And they have a really recognizable leaf shape, in my opinion, that serrated looking edge. And actually, one of the reasons why this is called goosefoot is because of the shape of the leaf. It has that general shape of a goose's foot. And as the plant continues to develop, you'll notice coming off of the main stem here a purplish tinge as it comes out to these stems here. You'll also find that some of the leaves will have a purple tinge to them, and you'll notice that on these younger plants they're not as serrated. The edges themselves of the leaves aren't as serrated or jagged until they start to get a little bit older. Then you start to see really that jagged, again, goosefoot appearance of the leaves. Hey, now as we get into talking more about this plant, do us a favor, leave us a comment down below and let us know if this plant looks familiar to you, if you've seen it before, and let us know if you knew that it was actually edible. All right, let's talk about overall growth for this plant, because this can actually grow. This Lambsquarters can grow upwards of 6 feet. That's 2 meters for those of you who are in the metric system. But most of the plants that I've seen in this area are typically between 2 and 4 feet tall at the time that we've seen them go to seed. And go to seed they do, believe you me. I've read all kinds of numbers about this because, of course, I've never counted this myself. But the suggestion is that these produce, a singular plant can produce upwards of 100,000 seeds. Now, I've seen, again, lots of different numbers about that. But even if it were half that amount, that's a ton of seeds. And most of the time those seeds spread, once it goes to seed, they open up and they drop within a couple of feet of the plant. But all it would take would be some of the songbirds that love to eat the seeds, or really just the wind, etc., to create some initial spread. And when you're talking about tens of thousands of seeds, it's no wonder that these start to show up everywhere. Now, when it comes to taste, Lambsquarters is actually in the same family as beets and Swiss chard and quinoa. And so I think you could argue that the taste is actually pretty comparable to a kind of combination of many of those plants. I would say that these younger ones, and these are about 6 or 7 inches tall at the time that I just pulled the top off here, this tastes to me closest to Swiss chard. It's definitely a cross between Swiss chard and spinach. It's not a really super strong taste, but it's earthy. It is actually quite delicious. Now, when it comes to looking at what part of the plant is edible, when the plant is younger, like this one, again, that 6 to 8 to 12 inches tall, the entire stem and leaves, etc., are all edible. And so you could take this when it's younger. Oh, very flavorful stem. Kind of reminds me almost of a bean flavor there. You can eat the whole stem raw. Again, when it's younger, it's more tender, and that's the time when I would say it's easiest to eat it raw. As the plant gets a little bit bigger, things become a little bit tougher, and so you'd want to make sure at that point that you probably want to saute or steam, etc., just to tenderize the plant that you're looking at. The older that the plant gets, the more bitter the leaves get. And that's true of a lot of different vegetables. So that, I think, is not actually very surprising. What I can guarantee, though, is that the taste of this plant is something that if you like your spinaches, your Swiss chard is my absolute favorite when it comes to leafy greens. If you like that flavor, you're gonna love the taste of the Lambsquarters. It's that good. And they've even done a study on this plant where they found that there were higher levels of iron, protein, vitamin B2, and vitamin C than either spinach or cabbage. So that's a pretty nutritionally packed plant. And you remember those tens of thousands of seeds that I talked about forming on each individual plant? Well, you can also eat those as well. You can eat them raw, you can roast them, or if you're really adventurous and have a couple of days time, you can sprout them, much like you can sprout quinoa or a lot of the other grains that are out there. We can sprout them and add those to salads as well. Now, I talked a little bit about some of the nutritional benefits of this plant, and there are plenty of other medicinal or health claims. I'm not going to go into that necessarily because I don't know the science behind that, but the fact that people have for many, many, many years used this plant in that way leads me to believe that there might be some validity there. But what I can say for sure is there is plenty of evidence out there showing the nutritional benefits, so I'm going to definitely go with not only is this something that's edible, but it's something that is potentially quite good for you. Now that does lead us to the next topic in this video though, and that is some of the warnings around eating a plant like this. Now one thing's true, whenever it comes to foraging or eating any of these greens that are out there that we didn't grow ourselves, we want to make sure that we're not eating anything that has potentially been sprayed with pesticides or herbicides. We don't want to add that into our diet. So in that sense, we want to be careful which plants we eat always. So if I don't know where a plant's been or where it's come from or what it's going through, I'm likely not going to eat it. Now, second to that, a lot of the leafy greens out there, like your spinaches, and this lamb's quarter is no exception, they contain oxalates. Oxalates are a naturally occurring compound that binds to calcium. So actually, if you're at risk for things like kidney stones, you might want to limit the consumption of or have a low oxalate diet. That being said, our research indicates that if you blanch, you steam, you boil the lamb's quarters, just like spinach, and you get rid of the water there, you're getting rid of some of the nutritional value, but you're also greatly reducing the amount of oxalates present. But for any of you for whom oxalate consumption is a concern, we would definitely recommend always consult with a medical professional first. Now, additionally, plants like this also contain something called saponins. And saponins sounds a little bit like soap, I think, and that's because there is a soapy substance, especially down in the taproot here. You can see what the root of this plant looks like as it gets bigger. It has that really long taproot. And saponins, especially in higher quantities, have been known to be toxic, especially in some livestock. Now, for humans, we aren't very good at absorbing it, and so it's typically not a problem, but that is something to note. And, you know, with anything, moderation is the key. Quinoa also contains a good amount of saponins, and a lot of people eat a lot of quinoa. And so typically what we've read, again, from our research, the health benefits of a plant like this, the nutritional benefits, outweigh any of those problems, as long as, like anything else, you eat in moderation. By the way, and this is definitely for a different video, but those saponins are used by a lot of people to create a soapy cleaner using the roots of these plants and a few other ingredients like the water poured off of flaxseed. But that's not something we've tried to make before. By the way, if you're wondering why plants have saponins, one of the reasons is to prevent some pests from getting at the plant, because it does, especially as the plant gets older, it does make the leaves more bitter and unappealing to some of the pests that would come along and eat the plant. So in a way, it's a type of defense mechanism for the plant to keep those pests from consuming it. And one thing's for sure, if you have a ton of this, you don't want to use it as a leafy green. Even though it has that long taproot, it's actually really easy to pull up. So that's something that's a benefit. But I would say that if you're going to pull this up, if you're not going to eat it, or even if you're going to eat it but there's too much and you don't want it to continue to grow back year after year after year and spread even more, you want to get in there and pull the top off before it goes to seed. Or much like our strawberry spinach, which is currently still 4 years after the last planting, spreading everywhere around here, you might find that this is going to keep popping up. Now, I'm not going to say that that's a bad problem. I'm going to say that's another one of those delicious garden problems that I'm happy to deal with. No, we hope you enjoyed today's video and found it informative. This is another one of the edible weeds. Oh, you know what? I'm going to show you something else that's going to be the topic of a future video. See if you can spot it right here, because one of these plants is not like the other. And one of these plants is another one of our edible weeds. But we're going to save that plant for a different video. If you did enjoy today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.